Welcome to exclusive Touching Podcast. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The night I was born was both the most celebrated and the most cursed night in my father's life. My mother, a gentlewoman named Neka, had labored for nearly 2 days in a small hospital in Enugu. The nurses whispered prayers, and my father, Chief Dyke, paced outside with bloodshot eyes, clutching a rosary and muttering the same words over and over. Lord, save my wife. Take me instead. But heaven was silent. When the cry of a newborn girl echoed through the room, it was followed by the haunting stillness of death. My father rushed inside, and what he saw broke him completely. My mother lying lifeless, her pale lips frozen in a faint smile, and me, a crying baby wrapped in her blood-stained wrapper. He picked me up with trembling hands, pressing my tiny face against his chest, as if he could breathe life back into her through his grief. From that moment, I became both his blessing and his curse, the reason he smiled and the reason he cried in the same breath. Growing up, I didn't understand why my father's eyes always watered when he looked at me too long. He would tell me stories of my mother, how she loved dancing in the rain, how she used to laugh so hard she'd clutch her stomach, and how her voice could calm his storms. I lived in those stories because that was all I had of her. My father refused to remarry for years. He poured every drop of his love into raising me. Every morning, he tied my ribbons himself, packed my lunch, and made sure I was never late to school. The villagers often teased him, saying, "Chief, this your daughter go kill you with pampering, oh." But he didn't care. I was his world, his reason to keep breathing. He called me Ada, his first and only child, and every night before bed, he would say, "You're the last gift your mother left me. I'll protect you till my last breath." And he did, for as long as he could. But love attracts envy the way light attracts moths. By the time I turned 12, my father's friends and even distant relatives began to pressure him to remarry. "You need a woman to take care of Ada," they said. "She needs a mother's touch." He resisted at first, but loneliness is a cruel disease. It eats quietly until it consumes reason. I remember the day he introduced Patricia. She was young, elegant, and smelled of foreign perfume. Her smile seemed innocent enough, but something in her eyes unsettled me, a coldness masked by charm. I was too young to understand it then. That night, I overheard my father saying to his friend, "She reminds me of Neka in some ways." I looked at Patricia's painted face and sharp laughter and knew he was lying to himself. My mother's ghost had been replaced by a woman whose smile hid something dark. And though I didn't know it then, that woman would one day destroy everything my father built with love. My father's love was my only armor against the world. He woke me up every morning with a gentle knock and the smell of cocoa and fried plantain. While other girls' mothers plaited their hair, my father sat behind me, tongue between his teeth in concentration, struggling with my stubborn strands. "Ah, Ada, your hair go wound me one day," he'd say, laughing through the pain. On school days, he carried my backpack and walked me to the gate, proudly waving at the neighbors who whispered that Chief Dyke had gone soft. But he didn't care. He was the kind of man who wore fatherhood like a badge of honor, never ashamed to show affection. Every success I had, he celebrated as if it were his own. When I came first in class, he bought me my first pair of white sneakers and told everyone at his office, "That's my Ada, the light of my life." He was my safe place in a world that often mocked him for loving too deeply. When Patricia came into our lives, her presence felt like a cold breeze that crept through the cracks of a once warm home. She acted kind at first, helping me with homework, calling me my dear, and cooking elaborate meals to impress my father. But soon, her real nature began to surface in subtle ways. She started criticizing my father for spoiling me. "Chief, this girl is growing too soft," she said one night when she thought I was asleep. "You should teach her to respect hierarchy." My father's voice was calm but firm. "Patricia, that's my daughter. She's all I have. Please leave her alone." Her silence afterward was heavy, venomous. The next morning, she smiled at me and said, "Good morning, my dear," but her eyes held something cold, something calculating. I began to sense that she didn't just want to be my stepmother. She wanted to erase me. Still, my father tried to keep peace. He organized family dinners, encouraged laughter, and often told me, "Don't worry, Ada. Patricia just needs time to love you." But love was never what she sought. She wanted control over him, over me, over the legacy he built. And slowly, she began to win. She took charge of the house, the accounts, and even started dressing in my mother's jewelry, claiming, "It's for remembrance." My father looked the other way, too tired to argue. Yet, whenever we were alone, his warm hand still brushed my hair, his voice still called me Ada M. And for those brief moments, I felt safe. But safety, like childhood, is fragile. It fades without warning, and one evening, that comfort was shattered forever. Patricia's younger brother, Victor, came into our lives like a shadow that never left. He was in his early 30s, tall with a deceptive smile, and a cologne that filled every room he entered. The first time I met him, I was 14, doing my homework in the living room. He patted my head and said, "You're growing into a fine young lady, Ada." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable. His eyes lingered longer than they should have. My instinct screamed, but I buried them under politeness. My father trusted him, he called him in-law, and even gave him a small business loan. "Victor is family now," my father said proudly. But to me, he was a silent threat. He laughed too loud, touched too freely, and always found a reason to be around when Patricia wasn't. Over time, Victor's visits became more frequent. Patricia encouraged it. "He's like an uncle to Ada," she would say, serving him food with a smile that never reached her eyes. I noticed how Victor's gaze always followed me, how his compliments grew bolder. "Ada, you're beautiful just like your mother was." I told my father once that I didn't like him, but my father waved it off. "He's harmless," he said, "just a little playful." Playful was not the word. One afternoon, while Patricia was at the salon and my father was at work, Victor came by under the guise of delivering some documents. I tried to ignore him, but he leaned close and whispered things that made my skin crawl. I ran to my room, locked the door, and cried. That night, I begged my father to send him away. My father promised he would talk to Patricia, but nothing changed. Then the whispers began. Patricia started telling people I was rude and disrespectful. She told my father I was acting strange, keeping secrets. I overheard her once saying, "She's growing wild, Dyke. Maybe you're too soft on her." My father defended me, but I could see doubt creeping into his eyes. Patricia's poison was working. The house that once echoed with laughter now echoed with suspicion and silence. I started locking my door at night. The once warm mansion now felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by living monsters pretending to be family. And though I couldn't prove it yet, I knew in my heart that Victor's darkness hadn't even begun to unfold. The night it happened was one I can never forget, not even in my dreams. The sky was silent, swollen with rain that never fell, and the entire house smelled faintly of burning candles and Patricia's imported perfume. My father had traveled for a brief business meeting in Abuja and left Patricia in charge. She acted kind at first, cooking dinner and asking about my school projects, but as the evening grew quiet, her brother Victor arrived. He claimed he came to deliver something for her from the market. I remember feeling uneasy the moment he stepped into the house. He smiled too much and kept looking at me like I was something he wanted to devour. I tried to excuse myself after dinner, retreating to my room, but Patricia stopped me. "Ada, go and fetch drinks for your uncle," she said sharply. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "Respect your elders," so I obeyed. But I didn't know that respect that night would cost me everything. It was late when Patricia announced she was stepping out to visit a friend. "Victor will lock up," she said. I froze when I heard that. I wanted to protest, to say no, but her glare silenced me. As the door shut behind her, the air changed. Victor moved closer, his laughter low and strange. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He told me to sit beside him, and when I refused, his smile faded into something dark and hungry. "Don't act innocent," he whispered. "You've been tempting me for years." My blood turned to ice. I ran toward my room, but he caught me before I could lock the door. I screamed, once, twice, but the walls swallowed my voice. I fought until I couldn't breathe. I begged, cried, prayed for a miracle that never came. When it was over, I lay on the cold floor, bleeding, broken, staring at the ceiling while Victor zipped his trousers and muttered, "If you tell anyone, you'll destroy your father." Then he left, leaving me with pain so deep I couldn't even cry anymore. That night, I died in every way that mattered. When my father returned 2 days later, he noticed the change immediately. I was pale, quiet, and refused to eat. He thought I was sick, but when I finally broke down and told him what happened, something inside him snapped. I watched the man, who never raised his voice, explode in a storm of rage. He stormed out that night, barefoot and trembling with anger, looking for Victor. The police came the next morning, and so did Patricia, pretending to cry. "She's lying," she screamed. "She's trying to destroy my family." My father ignored her. He filed a report, hired a lawyer, and swore to get me justice. But the system was cruel. Victor bribed the police, and Patricia used her influence to twist the story. They said I seduced him. They said I made it up. My father refused to give up, but I could see the weight crushing him. The once proud man who carried me on his shoulders now sat by my bedside whispering, "Ada M., I'll make them pay. I promise." For weeks, my father lived like a man at war with the world. He visited police stations, begged journalists, and met lawyers who demanded more money than he could afford. I saw the fire in his eyes every morning when he left and the exhaustion when he returned at night. "I won't rest until that animal rots in prison," he told me. His words were my only comfort in a world that had turned against me. The villagers whispered when I walked by. Some pitied me, but most mocked. "Who will marry her now? She must have provoked him." Their words cut deeper than any knife. Patricia added to the torment. She walked around the house, pretending to mourn the family shame. "You see what you've caused your father?" she would hiss. "You've destroyed his reputation." I would sit silently, holding my swollen belly, wondering if the child growing inside me was cursed by the same evil that destroyed my peace. My father was my only light. He would sit by me, rubbing my palms, whispering, "Don't listen to them, my daughter. Truth has a way of shining even in darkness." But truth can't fight corruption alone. The day before the court hearing, my father received a call from someone claiming to have evidence against Victor, proof that could win the case. I remember watching him pace the sitting room, full of cautious hope. "If this evidence is real, everything changes," he said. He kissed my forehead, told me to rest, and left the house in the evening. That was the last time I saw him alive. Hours later, a loud knock echoed through the compound. Neighbors rushed in carrying his lifeless body. His car had crashed along the expressway. The police said it was an accident, but I saw the bruises on his knuckles, the cuts on his neck. It wasn't an accident. Patricia wailed dramatically, but I noticed her relief hidden behind the tears. The world blurred around me. I screamed his name, clutching his cold hands, begging him to wake up. "You promised to protect me, Papa." I cried. But promises die too, especially in a world that feeds on injustice. The funeral was like a nightmare that refused to end. People came, cried, and left. Only Patricia seemed composed, managing the will, giving orders, acting like she owned everything. The day after he was buried, she called me into his office. "From now on, you'll respect me as your mother," she said coldly. "This house belongs to me. Don't forget that." I looked at her and saw the devil smiling behind her makeup. My father's portrait still hung behind her desk, and his eyes seemed to plead, "Be strong." I was 16, pregnant, and completely alone. The case against Victor was dropped quietly. He disappeared for a while. Patricia started selling my father's properties. The world that once revolved around my father's laughter now echoed with silence. The man who called me Ada M. was gone, and all that remained was his scent in the walls and a child growing inside me, his last promise, his last gift. When Zachora was born, I was still just a child learning how to hold one. The labor was long and painful, but when I heard his first cry, something inside me healed and broke at the same time. His tiny fingers clutched mine as if to say, "Don't give up, Mama." I named him after my father, Zipporah, meaning show the world. I swore I would show the world that I could survive, no matter how deep the wound. But Patricia had other plans. She looked at the baby with disgust and said, "This bastard will not bear my husband's name." She ordered me out of the master bedroom and into the servants' quarters behind the house. "You're lucky I'm letting you stay at all," she said, tossing my clothes into a plastic bag. I moved into that small room with my newborn, clutching him like my only lifeline. The nights were long. Zipporah cried often, and I had no one to help me. Patricia forbade the maids from assisting. "Let her learn responsibility," she said with a wicked smile. Days turned into months of humiliation. Patricia would host her friends in the parlor, laughing loudly while I washed her clothes or scrubbed floors. "Look, the chief's daughter," she'd say mockingly. A queen turned maid. Her laughter echoed through the compound. Some of the neighbors pitied me, but none dared to interfere. The power Patricia wielded was terrifying. She had taken control of my father's businesses, his cars, his accounts, everything. I had nothing left but my son. Each time I looked at Zipporah's face, I saw my father's eyes staring back, urging me to endure. So I did. I learned to swallow my pride, to move silently, to survive one day at a time. At night, I would whisper to my son, "You're my reason. One day, we'll leave this place." But Patricia wasn't satisfied with just my suffering. She wanted my spirit broken. She forbade me from going to school, from working, from speaking to anyone outside the compound. She even forced me to serve Victor again when he began visiting after my father's death. Each time he came, I avoided his eyes and prayed he wouldn't speak to me. But he always did, with that same disgusting grin. "You're still beautiful, Ada," he'd whisper. "Don't act like you don't miss me." The rage that burned inside me could have killed him, but fear kept me chained. I couldn't risk Zipporah's life. I couldn't risk losing the only thing that reminded me that I once mattered. In that mansion built by love, I became a ghost, my father's daughter in name only. But in silence, I made a vow. I would not die there. I would endure every insult, every pain, and one day I would rise from those ashes. And when I did, Patricia and her brother would kneel. Every morning in that house felt like waking up inside a nightmare I never chose. The same mansion that once held my laughter, my father's protective arms, and the aroma of his early morning acra, now suffocated me with silence and commands. I lived in the servants' quarters, a tiny corner with cracked walls and a leaking roof, yet it was still better than Patricia's presence. Zipporah was now 2, still a toddler, but wise beyond his years. He clung to me every time I left the room to work. "Mama, don't go," he'd cry, tears staining his small cheeks. But I had no choice. Patricia treated me like the hired help. I scrubbed floors while her pedicured feet rested on the same tiles my father had once paid millions to design. I cooked food I wasn't allowed to eat, cleaned rooms I was no longer welcome in, and washed clothes that belonged to the woman who had taken everything from me. I had become a stranger in my own home, a prisoner in the place built with my father's sweat and dreams. The maids watched me with a mix of pity and fear. None dared befriend me openly. Patricia made it clear I was beneath them now. "She's just another mouth I'm feeding out of pity," she would say loudly during staff meetings, her eyes never leaving mine. And when Victor began visiting more often, the air became even more poisoned. I made sure never to be alone in a room with him. Yet, even in public spaces, he found ways to harass me, brushing past me too closely, whispering crude remarks when no one was watching. I lived in fear, not just for myself, but for Zipporah. I often asked God why he had allowed me to survive childbirth only to become a walking shadow of myself. But then each time I heard my son's voice call me mama, or saw him smile through his hunger, I knew I had a reason to endure. For him, I would keep breathing. For him, I would not break, at least not in front of Patricia. But I wasn't the only one affected. Zipporah, young as he was, began to ask questions I couldn't answer. Why don't I have a grandpa? Why can't I play inside the big house? Why does Grandma call me bad names? Each question felt like a knife carving deeper into my already battered soul. I would lie, smile, or distract him with songs. But one day, I caught him trying to polish Patricia's shoes, mimicking what he saw the other maids doing. "I want Grandma to like me," he said innocently. I broke down that night. I cried until my chest hurt, because my child, born of pain, raised in shame, was trying to earn affection in a place where love had been buried with my father. I promised myself then, while holding his tiny body against my chest, that I would not let this cycle continue. Even if I had to crawl out of that mansion barefoot, I would get us out. And when I did, the world would remember my name. It started with a missing photo frame, my father's portrait, that once hung proudly in the center of the living room, now gone. At first, I thought it was a mistake, perhaps taken down to clean the wall. But by the end of that week, all traces of Chief Dyke had vanished. The painting in the dining hall, the award plaques, the framed degrees on the corridor, gone. His name was removed from the estate signpost, replaced with Patricia D. Foundation Hall. I stood in shock, my baby strapped to my back, watching workers scrape off the bronze letters from the gate. My father's legacy was being erased in broad daylight, and no one could stop it. When I confronted Patricia, shaking with grief, she sipped her wine and said coldly, "This is my husband's house now. You're just a reminder of a past I've outgrown." She smiled. "If you can't accept that, you know where the gate is." That was the first time I realized that she didn't just want to enslave me. She wanted to bury my father's memory altogether. But Patricia didn't stop at symbols. She began renaming his companies too. Dyke Agro Ventures became PD Holdings. His school project was shut down. The foundation he started to sponsor widows was liquidated. Everything my father built was being rewritten with a stroke of Patricia's greedy pen. I couldn't speak out publicly because I had no rights. No lawyer would represent me. Every document had been doctored, every witness silenced, and even the driver who once served us loyally was dismissed after warning me. "My daughter, these people are dangerous." The day I overheard Patricia laughing on the phone, saying she was just a mistake he never corrected, my knees buckled. I rushed to the bathroom and vomited bile. My blood boiled, but my hands were tied. My own name had been erased from the inheritance papers. In the eyes of the law, I was no one, just a housemaid with a bastard child. But I wasn't no one, not to my father. And I vowed to carry his memory in my bones, even if the world forgot. Still, I kept my head down and served tea in silence while they clinked champagne glasses in my father's lounge. I memorized every change, every lie, every betrayal. I saw Victor signing off new contracts under company names that never existed during my father's life. I started journaling in secret, documenting everything I saw and heard. One day I would use it. One day I would bring it all crashing down. But for now I endured. My fire had no fuel, just a flicker of revenge buried deep in my soul. And every time Patricia ordered me to sweep the stairs or shine her shoes, I did it with a bitter smile, knowing that ashes, when blown by the right wind, can blind the eyes of the proud. The first time Zakora fell seriously ill, I didn't know what to do. He had been coughing all week, but I thought it was just cold. Then one morning, he woke up burning with fever, his tiny chest rising and falling too fast. I rushed to Patricia's quarters, begging for help. "Please, he needs a hospital," I cried. She barely looked up from her makeup mirror. "Did I tell you to go and have a child?" she hissed. "Use your bastard's father to pay the bills." I fell on my knees, crying, "Please, he's dying." Patricia stood and poured her perfume over herself. "If the boy dies, you'll have one less mouth to feed," she said, walking away with her heels clicking against the tiled floor like bullets. I rushed back to my room, panicking, shaking. Zakora was gasping. I couldn't let him die. I wrapped him in my old wrapper, carried him on my back, and slipped out of the house like a thief in the night. I walked barefoot to the nearby chemist, my wrapper soaked in his sweat and my tears. The man looked at me and said, "You again?" He knew my story. Most people did. "Please," I whispered. "Just paracetamol and something to stop the cough." He stared at me, then at the child on my back. "You're living in Chief Dyke's mansion. Why can't you afford medicine?" I looked away, ashamed. Because the woman running that house is a demon, I said. He sighed, gave me a small bag of drugs, and said, "Bring the money later." I fell to my knees, thanking him, clutching the plastic bag like treasure. That night, I crushed the tablets into water, forced it gently into Zikora's mouth, and prayed like I'd never prayed before. I didn't sleep. I watched over him, whispered stories of my father to soothe my soul, and told God, "Don't take him too. He's all I have left." In the following days, as Zikora recovered slowly, I met a kind old woman outside the church who gave me a strange idea. She watched me struggle with my son and said, "You know how to cook?" I nodded. "Then sell food, even small akara or buns." That night I thought about it. Patricia never let me work outside, but maybe, just maybe, I could start something secretly. I began waking earlier, frying small puff behind the compound, sneaking them to the church gates. The church members began to notice me. Some bought out of pity, others out of taste. I began to save coins in a cracked plastic container hidden under my mattress. It was the first time I felt hope since my father died. But of course, Patricia found out. One of the maids snitched. She stormed into my room one evening, slapped me, and poured hot oil on the puff dough. "In my house? You're using my gas to make money," she screamed. I didn't cry. I just stared at her, my lip bleeding, my hand shaking. And in that moment, I stopped being afraid. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a woman collecting pain like bricks. One day, I would use them to build my own palace. The evening of the family dinner felt like a cruel joke crafted by fate itself. For weeks, Patricia had been preparing for it, boasting loudly about the elite gathering that would be hosted at the mansion. Politicians, pastors, business tycoons, people my father once called friends, were all invited. I overheard her instructing the maids to clean every corner, polish the marble floors, and decorate the compound with flowers. But what broke me wasn't the grandeur, it was when she pointed at me and said, "And you? You'll be serving." I froze. "Ma, please," I whispered, "can't I stay in the back?" Her lips curled. "Stay in the back? Are you not living in my house? You'll serve my guests, and you'll wear this." She tossed an old torn gown at me, the same one I had used for mopping the floor days earlier. I stood there trembling, holding the rag-like dress, and she sneered, "Make sure your bastard doesn't roam around. I don't want him near decent people." That night, I dressed slowly, every movement drenched in humiliation. My reflection in the cracked mirror barely looked human. The thin fabric clung to my body, exposing scars from old beatings. I brushed my son's hair and told him to stay quietly in the room, handing him a piece of dry bread I'd saved. "Mama will come back soon," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. When the guests arrived, I moved like a shadow, serving drinks, bowing, avoiding eyes. The laughter and music stung my ears because I knew what those walls had witnessed: love, laughter, and now mockery. Patricia floated around the room like a queen, introducing herself as Mrs. Dyke, widow of a great man, taking credit for everything he built. Each time I passed her, she whispered, "Smile, so they won't know what you are." I forced a smile until my face hurt. And then the air shifted. I heard a familiar voice, a voice that turned my veins to ice. Victor had arrived. Older, heavier, but still wearing that same predator's grin. "Ah, my dear sister," he shouted, hugging Patricia. "You didn't tell me Ada will be here." The room spun. Patricia laughed loudly, pretending not to notice my shaking hands. "She's the maid now, Victor. Don't disturb her." He smiled, licking his lips. Maid or not, she's still memorable. I froze mid-step, the tray trembling in my hands. The guests laughed, assuming it was a joke. But I knew his eyes, his tone, he meant every word. I slipped away into the kitchen, clutching the counter, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream, to run, but where would I go? This house, once my fortress, had become my cage. Little did I know, that night would end with the same monster trying again, and my world would finally shatter for good. Dinner had ended, and the guests were leaving one by one, their laughter echoing into the night like mockery carved into my soul. I tried to slip away, quietly, but Victor blocked my path near the corridor. The lights flickered, the sound of plates clinking fading behind us. He stepped closer, his voice low and sickly sweet. "You've grown, Ada. Even more beautiful than before." I flinched backward. "Leave me alone," I whispered. "I'm not that girl anymore." His smile twisted. "You think you're better than me now? You think you can ignore me after what we shared?" His words made my skin crawl. "We didn't share anything," I spat, trembling. "You destroyed me." He grabbed my arm roughly, his nails digging into my flesh. "Then let me destroy you again." That was the moment my rage exploded. I slapped him across the face so hard my hand stung. "Touch me again and I'll kill you," I hissed. His face darkened, but before he could react, I ran toward the sitting room, tears streaming down my face. Patricia was standing there, surrounded by a few remaining guests, her fake laughter cutting through the tension. I didn't care who was watching. "Tell your brother to stay away from me," I screamed. The room fell silent. Victor entered behind me, rubbing his cheek, playing the victim. "She attacked me," he shouted. Patricia's expression shifted instantly. The snake had shown her fangs again. "What's wrong with you, Ada?" she snapped. "He was only asking why you ignored him." "He tried to touch me again," I cried, shaking. "Again?" Patricia laughed, her voice sharp and cruel. "Are you mad? My brother doesn't want you. You're lucky anyone still lets you stay here." I looked around, no one moved. The same people who had once called me Chief Dyke's daughter now looked at me like dirt. Then Patricia said it, the words that would carve a scar in my heart forever. "If you can't respect my brother, then pack your things. Sleep with him or leave my house tonight." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. The world went quiet, my breath stuck in my throat. "What did you say?" I whispered. Patricia smirked. "You heard me. You've been eating my food, living under my roof. The least you can do is make my brother happy. If not, get out with that child of yours." I looked at her, at the guests whispering, at Victor grinning behind her, and something inside me broke. I had no dignity left to protect, but I had my son, and I would not raise him in a house ruled by monsters. Slowly, I took off my apron, dropped it on the table, and said quietly, "Then I'll leave." Patricia raised her brow. "In the middle of the night? In the rain?" "Yes," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I'd rather drown outside than die in your home." The silence was heavy as I turned and walked toward my room. For the first time in years, I felt free, terrified, but free. The rain had started before I finished packing. It fell heavily, drumming against the roof like the sky itself was crying for me. I wrapped Zecora in a shawl, his little arms clinging to my neck. He didn't understand what was happening. He only whispered, "Mama, are we going to Grandma's house?" I nodded weakly. "Yes, my love, but a better one." My hand shook as I folded our few clothes into a nylon bag, one old wrapper, 2 shirts, his tiny shoes. When I opened the door, the cold wind slapped my face, and Patricia was standing by the stairs with Victor beside her. "Leaving so soon?" she asked mockingly. I didn't reply. "Good," she said. "You and your bastard are nothing but bad luck." She turned to the guard and said, "Open the gate and let her out. If she ever steps foot here again, call the police." The guard hesitated, pity in his eyes. "Madam, do it," she barked. As I walked through the compound, every raindrop felt like a needle stabbing my skin. My bare feet sank into the mud, the nylon bag pressed to my chest. I heard Victor laugh behind me, his voice blending with the thunder. "You'll crawl back, Ada. You always do." I didn't look back. The gate creaked open, and I stepped into the street. The guards shut it behind me with a loud clang, a sound that felt final, like the end of a chapter in a book I never wanted to write. The rain soaked through my clothes, blurring my vision, but I kept walking. I had no destination, only determination. My son whimpered against my shoulder. "Mama, I'm cold." I kissed his forehead, whispering, "Hold on, my child. The night doesn't last forever." But deep down, I wasn't sure if dawn would ever come for us. We reached the roadside, drenched and shivering, and I sat under a tree, rocking Zecora back and forth. The cars sped by, their headlights slicing through the darkness, but no one stopped. The streets of Enugu didn't care for broken women or hungry children. I thought about my father, his warm hands, his laughter, his promise to protect me. I looked toward the mansion in the distance, glowing with light and music, and whispered through my tears, "Papa, I kept your name alive." I didn't bow. It was the only victory I could claim that night. When Zipporah finally fell asleep in my arms, I stared up at the sky and made a vow that someday I would return. Not as a maid, not as a victim, but as a storm. And when I did, Patricia and Victor would remember this rain, not as water, but as the cleansing fire of everything they thought they buried. The first shelter I found was a decaying building behind an old Anglican church in Enugu. Its walls were cracked, and the roof leaked whenever it rained. But to me, it was paradise compared to Patricia's mansion. I begged the gatekeeper, an elderly man with tired eyes, to let me stay. "Just for one night," I said, clutching Zipporah to my chest. He looked at me, at my muddy clothes and shivering child, and sighed deeply before unlocking a small wooden door beside the church door. "Stay quiet," he said. "If the Reverend finds out, I'll lose my job." That night, I spread my wrapper on the cold cement floor and placed Zipporah beside me. His small hand clung to mine even in sleep, as if he feared I'd disappear. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, tears drying on my cheeks. My body ached, but my soul was strangely calm. I had escaped hell, and even though I had nothing, I was finally free to breathe without fear of being called worthless. Days turned into weeks. The old gatekeeper, Papa Namdi, I later learned, allowed me to stay as long as I helped clean the church compound. I swept, mopped, and polished pews for small change. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Every morning, I'd wake up before dawn, whisper a prayer beside the altar, and promise my father that I wouldn't let Patricia's cruelty define me. Zipporah, ever cheerful despite our poverty, became the heart of my little world. He played with stones outside the church, laughed at birds, and once told me, "Mama, I think God hides bread in the clouds." His innocence gave me hope. But even hope needs food, and the little we had was never enough. There were nights when we went to bed hungry, nights when Zipporah's cough returned, and I'd cry silently so he wouldn't see. One Sunday after service, the Reverend's wife noticed me sitting under a tree, staring into space. She approached me with a gentle smile and asked, "My daughter, can you cook?" I nodded nervously. That question changed everything. The Reverend's wife, Madame Teresa, offered me small jobs after church gatherings, helping in the kitchen, baking small chin-chin, frying puff-puff for children. She taught me how to mix flour, sugar, yeast, and patience into something beautiful. "You have a gift," she told me one day, watching as my pastries turned golden brown. "Don't waste it." That night, I stayed awake thinking about her words. I realized I didn't need a mansion, a husband, or anyone's approval. I just needed a skill, a plan, and my will to rise. I started selling pastries outside the church gate. At first, people bought out of pity, but soon they bought because they loved the taste. My hands, once calloused from scrubbing floors, now created something sweet enough to make strangers smile. I began saving coins in an old tin can I found in the dustbin. It wasn't much, but each drop of sweat, each sale, was proof that I was no longer Patricia's victim. I was building something small, fragile, but mine. Within a year, my pastries had become a quiet miracle. Children at the nearby school waited by the fence every morning, shouting, "Auntie Ada, bring puff puff." Some teachers began pre-ordering their snacks. The Reverend's wife helped me open a small table beside the road, covered with a faded umbrella. I named it Zico's Delight after my son. It wasn't a registered business, but it gave me a purpose. Every coin I made went into savings, and slowly, life began to take shape again. Zipporah grew into a bright, polite boy who always helped me carry trays. One day, he'd say proudly, "I'll build you a big bakery, Mama." His words became my daily prayer. I refused to let him see how tired I was, how my body ached after long hours under the sun. Each time I felt weak, I remembered Patricia's laughter and Victor's grin, and my pain turned into fire. I whispered to myself, "You will rise, Ada. You will rise, and they will kneel. It was around this time that I met a man named Mr. Kalu, a quiet, middle-aged widower who owned a nearby bakery. He had been watching me for months, intrigued by how my small roadside stall drew so many customers. One afternoon, he approached me and said, "Your hands are blessed. Have you thought about expanding?" I laughed bitterly. "Expand with what, sir?" "Flour and prayers." He smiled and replied, "Sometimes prayers open doors that money can't." A few days later, he offered to teach me proper baking techniques in his bakery after hours, in exchange for helping clean his shop. I agreed. Every night, after putting Zipporah to bed, I walked to his bakery and learned how to measure, how to knead, how to bake in bulk. He became a mentor, not a savior. I learned to manage customers, packaging, and even basic accounting. For the first time, I saw a future where I wasn't just surviving, I was building something enduring, something that bore my name. Years passed, and Zico's Delight evolved from a roadside table to a small rented shop. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the street every morning. I hired 2 young girls from the church to help. Zipporah started attending a good primary school, his uniform always neatly ironed. People began calling me Madam Ada, and I couldn't help but smile at how far I'd come. But beneath the joy, a quiet storm still brewed inside me. I hadn't forgotten Patricia and Victor, not their words, not their cruelty. I didn't know when or how, but I promised myself I would face them again. I didn't want revenge out of bitterness. I wanted justice for my father, for the girl I once was. And one fateful morning, as I arranged cupcakes on the counter, an elegant woman in a gold wrapper walked in. She smiled, bought a box of pastries, and said, "You're quite good. I'm hosting an event next month. Would you be available for catering?" I asked for her name. She replied with a smirk that froze my blood. Mrs. Patricia Dyke. The past had just walked back into my life. The paper invitation arrived 2 weeks later, sealed in gold foil, with my bakery's name written in careful handwriting. Zico's Delight Catering Services is invited to provide desserts for Mrs. Patricia Dyke's 60th birthday celebration. I stared at it for hours, my hands trembling. Zipporah, now 8, looked over my shoulder and asked, "Mama, why are you shaking?" I smiled faintly, because God finally answered a prayer. I had prayed for years to be strong enough to face my past without fear. Now, the opportunity had arrived like a test. Part of me wanted to decline, to stay in peace, but another part, the part that remembered the rain, the gate slamming, and Patricia's laughter, refused to let go. This was my chance, not to fight with words or violence, but to reclaim my power silently. "We're taking this job," I told my assistants, "and we'll do it perfectly." They didn't know that beneath my calm smile, my heart was pounding with a mix of rage, pain, and anticipation. In the days leading up to the event, I prepared with precision. I ordered special ingredients, designed a cake so beautiful it could make the devil jealous, and planned every flavor myself. But what I didn't tell anyone was that I was also planning something else, a reveal that would shake Patricia's perfect world to its core. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more strategic. This time, I wouldn't shout or cry. I would let truth speak for itself. One evening, while reviewing the event's address, my breath caught. The party was to be held in the same mansion I had been thrown out of years ago. My father's house. I stared at the paper, my fingers trembling. "So it's still standing," I whispered. Zipporah walked in, his school shoes dusty. "Mama, can I come with you to the big party?" I looked at his eyes, so much like my father's, and smiled softly. "Yes, my son, you'll come, but not as a servant's child. This time, you'll walk through that gate as the air they tried to erase." The morning of the event was radiant, the kind of sunshine that hides secrets in plain sight. I wore a white lace gown, simple but elegant, with my hair neatly tied back. Zipporah wore a crisp school uniform, his shoes polished till they shone. As our van pulled up to the mansion, my chest tightened. The gates were freshly painted, the gardens trimmed, but the walls still whispered the same memories. Patricia had no idea who I was anymore. Success had changed my face and fortune. When I stepped out of the van, one of the guards opened the gate, confused but polite. "Madam, you're the caterer?" I nodded. "Yes, I said quietly, looking at the house that once caged me. I'm here to serve one last time. But this time, it wasn't food I came to serve, it was justice. The moment I stepped into the mansion's kitchen, the air grew heavy with memory. Every scent, every tile, every corridor was a ghost of my past. The other caterers buzzed around in excitement, unaware that the walls of that house had once swallowed my screams. I moved silently, directing my team with calm authority. Please handle the dessert table first, I said softly. But my heart thudded in my chest when I heard Patricia's laughter echo from the sitting room. Time had not tamed her arrogance. Her voice still carried that false sweetness that made strangers adore her and victims crumble. I peeked from behind the kitchen door for the briefest moment. There she was, older, fuller, but still adorned like royalty in gold lace and heavy jewelry. She waved gracefully at guests, but her eyes still held that glint of cruelty I could never forget. As the evening unfolded, I kept my head down, my plan hidden beneath the calm rhythm of work. Patricia strutted into the kitchen at one point to inspect the dishes. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, resting briefly on me. For a second, she frowned. "Have we met before?" she asked. My heart nearly stopped. I forced a polite smile and bowed slightly. "No, madam. First time working for you," I replied in a low, professional tone. She sniffed, tossed her scarf over her shoulder and said, "Good. I don't work with disobedient faces." Then she left. I stood frozen, shaking, fighting back tears. I had become the stranger she couldn't recognize, and that was my victory. My son, Zakora, stood quietly outside in his school uniform, helping the servers pass trays of cupcakes. His poise and confidence reminded me of my father. Guests kept complimenting him. Such a well-trained boy. If only they knew whose blood ran in his veins. Later that evening, while ensuring everything was perfect, I saw Victor walk in. My breath caught. Age hadn't softened him either. His belly had grown, but his evil smirk remained the same. His eyes roamed the room until they fell on me, and for a brief second, I saw confusion flicker across his face. He took a few steps forward, staring as if trying to remember. Then, slowly, recognition dawned. "No, it can't be," he murmured. I turned away, pretending to rearrange pastries, my heart pounding. But he didn't stop. He moved closer, leaning in with that same vile voice I once feared. "Ada, is that you?" I met his gaze calmly this time, my lips forming the faintest smile. "Sir, you must be mistaken," I said evenly. "I'm just the caterer." Then I walked away before he could speak again, leaving him standing there, sweating, haunted by a past that was finally circling back to claim him. The dinner began beautifully, at least on the surface. Guests clapped, laughed, and toasted to Patricia's success. The hall was filled with chandeliers, the aroma of expensive perfumes, and deceit disguised as grace. I moved through the tables, ensuring each plate was served perfectly. But beneath that calm exterior, my real performance was about to begin. As Victor drank glass after glass of wine, boasting loudly about his business ventures, I slipped away to a corner where my handbag lay hidden. Inside it was a small voice recorder, something I'd kept close for years. Months earlier, I had set him up when he came to my bakery, pretending not to know me. I had recorded every vile word that came out of his mouth, every confession of what he did to me as a teenager, and every mention of how Patricia handled the aftermath. Tonight, that truth would finally be heard. When dessert was served, I watched him closely. His arrogance grew with each drink. He laughed, called for Patricia, and even flirted with one of the younger guests. "You still haven't changed," Patricia teased, lightly hitting his shoulder. "You and women." He chuckled. "Ah, you know me, sister. I always take what I want." The words echoed across the table, and I knew the time had come. I turned to my team. "Play the music file for the slideshow," I said quietly, signaling my assistant to switch the laptop feed. The projector flickered to life. But instead of the slideshow Patricia expected, the hall filled with Victor's voice, raw, unmistakable, and evil. She was 16. She begged me to stop. I told her no one would believe her. My sister fixed it for me. She handled it. The hall fell silent. The laughter died. Guests froze in disbelief. Patricia's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. I stepped forward from a crowd, standing tall, unbothered. Victor stammered, This is fake." Patricia turned pale. "Turn that off," she shouted. But the old driver, my father's loyal man, who had been waiting for this moment, walked into the hall. "It's true," he said firmly. "I was there. I saw her crying that night." Chief Dyke wanted justice, but Patricia stopped him. She said she'd rather bury his name than let the world know what her brother did. The crowd gasped. Phones came out, recording everything. Patricia screamed at the guards, "Take them out," but no one moved. Even her friends were stepping back, disgusted. I met Victor's eyes. He was sweating, trembling, humiliated. "You said I'd always crawl back," I said softly. "But tonight, I'm standing tall, and you're the one crawling." Then I walked away, leaving them to drown in their shame as the truth replayed again and again, echoing through the mansion that once silenced my voice. Chaos erupted like a storm. Guests whispered furiously, phones flashed, and Patricia's perfect world began to crumble in real time. Victor lunged toward me, his face red with rage. "You set me up," he roared. Before he could touch me, Zecora stepped forward, his small frame trembling but firm. "Don't touch my mother," he shouted. The crowd gasped, murmuring, "That's her son." Patricia screamed, "Guards, throw them out," but no one moved. Loyalty had shifted. The lawyer who once worked for my father entered the hall at that exact moment, holding a brown envelope. "Madam Patricia," he said coolly, "you might want to hear this before shouting further." Everyone turned. This is the original property deed signed by Chief Dyke 2 days before his death. It states that the mansion, the estate, and all attached assets revert to his biological daughter, Ada Dyke, upon his passing. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Patricia staggered backward. No, that's impossible." The lawyer placed the papers on the table. "You forged the documents after his death, madam. But you made one mistake. Chief Dyke lodged a certified copy with our firm. It was recently discovered." He turned toward me and handed me the envelope. "Miss Ada, your father's wishes belong to you." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of victory, of closure, of justice, finally catching up after years of darkness. Victor tried to run, but 2 police officers, who had been alerted by the lawyer beforehand, entered the hall and stopped him. "Mr. Victor Okoye, you are under arrest for sexual assault, obstruction of justice, and attempted fraud." Patricia screamed, grabbing his arm. "You can't take my brother. He's innocent." The officers ignored her as they dragged him out in handcuffs. The guests recorded everything, their murmurs like thunder. So she was the victim all along. That poor girl. Patricia collapsed, wailing, "Ada, please. Don't destroy me." But I simply looked down at her and said, "You destroyed yourself the day you tried to erase my father's name." As Victor's car sped away and the crowd dispersed, I walked through the hall one last time. My shoes clicked against the marble floor I once scrubbed in tears. The chandeliers glittered, but this time they illuminated truth instead of lies. Zecora held my hand tightly, looking around in awe. "Mama," he whispered, "this is our house." I smiled faintly, kneeling to his height. "Yes, my son. Your grandfather built it with love. We're home now." Patricia sobbed behind me, begging, but I didn't look back. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, and now it had come, not with vengeance, but with divine justice. The house that once rejected me now echoed with my footsteps, and for the first time since my father's death, I felt his presence again, strong, proud, and at peace. The following morning was quiet, too quiet. No noise from Patricia's loud heels, no gossiping maids echoing through the hallways, no music blaring from the balcony. Just peace. I woke up in the master bedroom, the very room Patricia had once kicked me and my newborn out of like filth. Now I stood barefoot on the same marble floor, the morning sun pouring through the white curtains, and I whispered to the walls, "Papa, I'm home." The mansion no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a legacy. I walked through every room that morning, touching the banisters, the pictureless frames, the spaces once filled with my father's presence. And then I made my decision. I would restore everything. I would bring back his name, his vision, his honor. His photos were still in my box of memories, and I began hanging them back, one by one. In the hallway, in the parlor, in the main study. No longer hidden, no longer erased. Patricia was still in the guest room, her face swollen from a night of weeping. Her pride had shattered into tiny fragments too small to gather. She no longer barked orders. She barely made eye contact. When I entered the room, she knelt immediately. "Ada, please." I know I was wrong. I was afraid. I was jealous. "Your father loved you more than anyone." I stared at her, without blinking. "He loved you too," I said. "But you turned his house into hell. You killed his joy. You silenced his voice." Her tears fell harder. "Forgive me, Ada. Please. Don't throw me out." I didn't answer right away. I sat across from her, calmly watching the woman who once stood above me now tremble beneath me. "You didn't just throw me and my son into the rain," I whispered. "You tried to bury me with your brother's sins. And you buried my father's name like trash. Why should you stay in his house?" She clutched my legs, sobbing. "I have nowhere else to go." I stood slowly. "Then you'll leave with what you came with, nothing." Later that afternoon, I called for her bags to be packed. No violence. No scene. Just quiet justice. As she walked through the compound for the last time, a few neighbors gathered, whispering. Some wept, not for her, but for the poetic twist they were witnessing. "Isn't that Madame Patricia?" one asked. "She's the one who kicked the girl out years ago. Now the girl is the owner." The guard who once shut the gate in my face opened it wide for her this time. "Safe journey, madam," he said coldly. She turned one last time to look at the mansion, hoping for a miracle, but found none. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I simply stood beside Zecora, tall and proud, as the gate closed behind her. The mansion sighed in relief. The curse had finally been lifted. Weeks later, the entire mansion had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. My father's name had been restored to every wall, every plaque, every document. Chief Dyke Memorial Foundation was officially launched on the day he would have turned 65. The foundation was set up to support abused girls, fatherless children, and women who had been silenced by power. I used the money from the mansion and bakery to sponsor scholarships, hospital bills, and even food banks. But I never made it about revenge. I made it about rebuilding. I knew my father would have wanted that. Zecora, now 9, became the unofficial face of the foundation. Every time he spoke publicly, people stared in awe. "He speaks like a grown man," they'd say. "He's his grandfather's child." And he was. Brave, gentle, full of dreams. He'd often ask, "Mama, will I be in charge one day?" And I would smile. "You already are. This legacy is yours to protect." Victor remained in prison. Sentenced after multiple victims came forward. The recording I played at the party had encouraged other girls to speak out, and their voices became a storm the court couldn't ignore. Patricia, disgraced and penniless, now sold second-hand clothes by the roadside in Onitsha. Word had it that she lived in a small, unpainted room beside a mechanic's shed. Once, one of my bakery suppliers mentioned seeing her begging a customer for transport fare. "Do you feel better now?" he asked. "Irraplia." "No. I just feel lighter." I had no hatred left, just the peace that comes from justice served without lifting a hand. People begged me to take back the mansion and turn it into a museum. But I refused. "It will remain a home," I said. "Not for power, but for healing." On the 1-year anniversary of reclaiming the mansion, I held a quiet Thanksgiving service. Friends, survivors, and children from the foundation filled the compound. As the choir sang it, "Is Well," I stood at the same spot where I was once kicked out in the rain. This time, I held no nylon bag, no shame, and no tears, only my son's hand in mine and peace in my chest. As the final prayer ended, I looked up to the sky and whispered, "Papa, I kept my promise." A breeze blew gently through the compound, rustling the trees, as if heaven was answering back. Zecora leaned on me and said, "You're the strongest woman I know." I held him close and replied, "Because I had the strongest father." The past no longer haunted me. It became the soil in which my strength had grown. And as the sun dipped behind the compound walls, I knew that I had truly come back, not with shame, but with purpose. The end. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Touching Podcast for more.